My name is Margaret Hale, and I built this house one paycheck at a time after my husband died. I was stirring tomato soup on a quiet Thursday when I heard my daughter-in-law's voice from the hallway, low and certain, as if the walls themselves should obey her. Once Margaret signs the deed, we'll move in right away. If she won't, there are plenty of nursing homes. The spoon stopped in my hand. I could smell the soup scorching, but all I saw was the door frame, and behind it, the shadow of the person I used to welcome like a daughter. I didn't speak. I didn't storm out. I set the spoon down and turned the burner off because I've learned that when a fire wants to run wild, the first thing you do is take away its heat. My heart pounded in my throat. Somewhere in that whispery phone call, I heard my son's name, Daniel, and I heard agreement, not defense. It was a small sound, a wordless hum, but I know his voice the way a mother knows the weight of her own hands. I stood perfectly still, the silence alive around me, and tasted a metallic tang in my mouth. They were planning to live here, to bring her family in, to make my house their solution, and if I resisted, they'd file me away somewhere tidy. I pressed my palm to the cool counter to steady myself. I wasn't going to hand over the deed, and I wasn't going to be filed away. The soup had a ring of dark red around the pot when I finally took it to the sink. The faucet stuttered and hissed, and the kitchen filled with the sound of water beating metal. I focused on that sound because it was easier than replaying the exact cadence of Lydia's words. When I turned off the tap, the house felt too quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes every floorboard creak sound like a judgment. Daniel came through the doorway, cheeks flushed from the cold. He kissed my temple the way he's done since he was a teenager, and for a moment I almost believed we were back in a safer year. Lydia followed, bright and careful, her smile fitting perfectly into the shape of her face. She set a bag of salad on the counter and touched my elbow. Sugar sweet. Smells wonderful. Mom. I glanced at the wall phone. No red light, no proof. The lack of it made me feel foolish. The way you feel when you catch your foot on a rug and stumble in front of company. We sat down to eat. Daniel told me about a backlog at work, the way his manager had shuffled deadlines and left him to juggle the pieces. Lydia mentioned Ethan's school fundraiser and how ticket sales were a little slow this year. The conversation skittered along the surface like a water bug. Every time silence threatened to crack it open, Lydia poured more words into it. When dinner ended, Daniel carried the dishes and Lydia wiped the table, and I watched their practiced choreography with a stranger's eyes. Was the helpfulness a kindness or a rehearsal? Lydia's gaze flicked toward the hallway once, quick as a sparrow. And when she noticed me looking, she dipped her head and smiled. After they left, I walked the house the way I used to when the boys were small and fevers ran hot. The living room rugs, the framed photos, graduations, first bikes, Ethan's missing teeth smile, the ring of keys in the ceramic dish, the deed in the file box upstairs behind the stack of tax returns. I laid my hand on the banister and felt the varnish I'd applied myself the summer Daniel left for college. I told the empty house, in a voice I barely heard, "Not yet, not like this." Sleep didn't come easy. Whenever it tried, that sentence returned, the one about plenty of nursing homes, as if I were an old cardigan to be folded and stored. I stared at the faint green numbers on my alarm clock until morning put a gray thumbprint on the window. By daylight, the things I'd ignored for weeks looked like signposts I had chosen not to read. Lydia had started bringing glossy brochures and leaving them in places where I'd find them without being told, on the coffee table under the remote, tucked into the basket with the mail, slipped between two cookbooks, sunlit courtyards, smiling gray-haired couples playing cards. A caption about safety and community and peace of mind for everyone. Daniel had asked twice to help get organized, which meant, let's look at your important papers. The first time, I'd laughed and told him I knew exactly where everything was. The second time, his mouth tightened at the corners, as if my confidence were an untidy drawer he intended to shut. I tried to tell myself it was care, clumsily expressed, but the memory of Lydia's voice made everything else ring with a different pitch. I took the file box from the closet and set it on my bed. The metal edges were cold against my wrists. The deed, the mortgage release, the will I'd made after I lost Jim, orderly documents, sensible decisions. I slid them back and wrapped a sweater around the box before returning it to the closet. An odd impulse to keep the papers warm. The phone vibrated with a text from Daniel. Could we come by tonight? Talk through some ideas? Lydia followed with a heart emoji and a "we love you" that didn't land where love usually lands. I typed back yes and set the phone face down. Afternoon drifted into evening and the house gathered its familiar shadows. I made coffee I didn't drink and took out the good cups, a habit I have when I need courage. When Daniel and Lydia arrived, Lydia's perfume reached the door before she did. Daniel took off his coat and draped it neatly on the chair, the way his father used to, and then he sat upright, hands folded. He cleared his throat. Mom, we've been thinking this through. The house is beautiful, but it's a lot. The shoveling, the utilities, the repairs. We worry about you here alone. We found a place not far, Maple Grove. They have activities, transportation, on-site medical, and we can help manage the bills. Lydia slid a brochure across the table as if she were dealing a single card in a quiet game. It's really nice and practical. If we were here, if my parents moved in too, we could all share the load. It would be lively. Ethan would love having more people around. My hands cradled the warm cup as if it could keep them from shaking. It's lively now, I said. I like my quiet lively. I smiled, and the smile felt like a towel wrung out too hard. They traded a glance I might have missed if I were not looking for it. Daniel softened his voice. No decisions tonight. Just options. He said the word options as if it meant freedom, not a narrowing hallway. When they left, the brochure lay on the table like a prescription I had no intention of filling. I carried it to the trash and slid it in face down. The house settled around me, and I stood in that settling, making a decision I did not yet know how to carry out. The next morning, I called Susan. She's the friend who has seen me through broken appliances, broken arms, and the kind of broken hearts that don't bleed. She listened without interruption, the phone a soft shell against my ear. When I reached the part about the hallway and the nursing homes, she inhaled sharply and then let the breath go slow. Come over, she said. Bring your legal folder. We'll make a list. I laughed because Susan likes lists, but the laugh came out thinner than usual. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and bleach. She slid a mug toward me and planted both elbows on the table. Margaret, this isn't help. This is control. It's elder financial abuse with manners. The words were clinical, but her gaze was all warmth. We're going to lock the doors they're tugging on. Susan knows people in town. Within an hour, she had me on the phone with a banker who explained how to add alerts and how not to grant anyone access just because the word family appears in a sentence. He used phrases like power of attorney and beneficiary and safeguards. And for once, those words didn't scare me. They felt like bricks in a wall I could build. After the bank, we called an attorney. Mr. Carter answered himself, which surprised me, and his voice had the clean, measured tone of someone who sees storms for a living. I told him about the brochures in the hallway and the way Lydia speaks as if my choices should be delivered to her door. Do not sign anything, he said. Not a temporary transfer. Not a management agreement. Nothing. If you want to explore options, we'll do it on your terms. Come in tomorrow and bring your deed and will. We'll review everything." The day slid by in a blur of paper and passwords. When I got home, I opened the file box again, but this time my hands didn't shake. I added a fresh sheet of paper to the front, a small act of order in the face of someone else's plan. That night, Daniel texted a photo of Ethan's art project, a rainbow made of torn construction paper, strips glued in cheerful arcs. Under it, he typed, "Ethan wants to show you this on Sunday." I stared at the tiny burst of color on my screen. I felt love press up against anger, like two strangers trying to pass in a narrow hall. I typed back that I'd love to see it. I stood by the kitchen window, the yard a pale square in the darkness, and allowed myself to feel both things at once, the fear of losing my home and the love for the boy who runs across my yard to hug me. It seemed important not to let either one cancel the other. Mr. Carter's office smelled faintly of coffee and dry paper. Diplomas lined the wall, and a plant in the corner looked like it had been listening to secrets for years. He asked for my documents and read them the way a careful person reads a recipe for a cake that matters. When he finished, he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and looked at me as if I were the only thing in the room that wasn't ink. "You've done a lot right," he said. "You own the house free and clear. Your will is current. The risk here isn't paperwork, it's pressure." He explained that temporary transfers can become very permanent and that people dress coercion in soft clothes. "If you want to keep the house," he said, "we can fortify your position. If you want to sell, we can do that safely. But you don't give up control to make someone else comfortable." I told him I didn't want to be pushed into any box labeled convenience. He nodded, as if that were the wisest sentence anyone had spoken that morning, and outlined options. We could place the house in a trust, with me as trustee. We could set up alerts that ping him if someone so much as breathes near my title online. Or if keeping the house had started to feel like living with a person who loves you badly, we could sell quickly and cleanly to a cash buyer with an honest reputation. 7 to 10 days is possible, he said. Faster if the buyer's ducks are in a row. I didn't know. Walking into that office, that selling would feel like an act of protection rather than defeat. But when I imagined Lydia's parents measuring the living room for their furniture, something in me hardened to a useful shape. If I sell, I said, it will be because I decided. And the sentence was a key turning in an invisible lock. He made a few calls. I watched his mouth form numbers, closing dates, the word escrow. He slid a pad across the desk and asked me to write down what I wanted in a home if I moved. Light, safety, something small enough to clean in an afternoon. I wrote, sunlight, a quiet street, enough room for Ethan to draw. By noon, an offer sat in front of me from a buyer whose references were as tidy as a well-folded shirt. We could close Friday. I asked Mr. Minarshur Carter to add a clause that allowed me to remain in the house for 2 weeks, rent-free, to move in peace. He smiled. Spoken like someone who knows her own pace. When I left the office, the air had that brittle brightness winter saves for the brave. I walked to the car with my scarf loose around my neck and my hands bare, as if daring the cold to do more than sting. On the passenger seat, the offer sat under my glove, and I rested my hand on it like a promise. Daniel texted, asking if they could come by with some paperwork to make things easier. That word, easier, rang false, but I agreed to 7 o'clock. I set out teacups, more for courage than hospitality. When they arrived, Lydia's smile was clipped, rehearsed. Daniel carried the folder like it was a gift, though his eyes shifted nervously. Lydia slid a document across the table. "It's temporary," she said, nails tapping lightly. Just lets us handle payments. Protects you," Daniel added, almost pleading. "It's only to help. Mom, we're worried." I read enough to see the trick. My voice stayed calm. "I won't be signing." The air shifted. Lydia's charm faltered. Then she pressed again. Retirement homes, activities, safety. She spoke of bingo nights as though that could replace the warmth of my kitchen. "I already have a community," I told her. "I choose my own movies, my own company. I like it that way." Finally, Lydia's tone hardened. "We could move in this weekend. My parents could take the guest room. It's silly for all this space to sit unused." The words pierced deeper than she realized. I set my cup down carefully. "It's not unused. It's mine." Daniel's head lifted, startled. "Where would we live then?" His voice carried a child's bewilderment, not a man's plan. "That's for you and your wife to answer," I said. My words left no room for misunderstanding. They gathered their folder and left without another plea. When the door closed, I leaned against it, the wood cool against my back. For the first time since overhearing that hallway whisper, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Friday looked ordinary, but inside, everything had shifted. At Mr. Carter's office, I signed the closing papers. The buyer was polite, efficient. The funds transferred with a quiet ping, and Carter slid the confirmation across his desk. "It's official. You're free," he said, driving home. I took the long route past the apartment I'd chosen. Its brick walls glowed faintly in the pale sun. A balcony faced the street, bare geraniums bending in the wind. I pictured Ethan there, launching paper planes, his laughter rising like a hymn. That image carried me. That evening, Daniel and Lydia arrived, folder in hand. Their steps sounded louder than usual on the porch. I opened the door, and before they spoke, my phone rang. Mr. Carter again. "Sale recorded," he said. "Congratulations, Margaret." I thanked him and let the silence hang in the air after I hung up. I looked at my son. "I sold the house. It closed today. I'll stay 2 more weeks before moving." Daniel blinked, as if I had spoken a language he didn't know. "You sold it?" His voice cracked. Lydia's posture froze. "Where will we live?" Daniel asked. Smaller this time, stripped of certainty. "That's for you and Lydia to decide," I said. Lydia's mask slipped. "Selfish," she spat. "We're family. My family doesn't plan someone else's life in secret," I answered. The tea between us cooled untouched. The house seemed to exhale as they turned for the door. The latch clicked, sharp and final. I stood in the stillness, no longer fearing what would be taken, because the choice was already mine. 2 mornings later, I woke before the sun and packed until the tape on the boxes sang. Susan came with coffee and a roll of labels, and together we turned what looked like upheaval into stacks that made sense. I kept the curtains open as we worked. The maple out front threw long shadows across the floorboards I had polished 100 times, and I let the sight of them be a goodbye rather than a wound. I drove to the apartment near the park with the first carload. The manager handed me the keys and showed me the light switches like a person offering spells. The living room was small enough to hold without thinking. But when I opened the balcony door and the cold air touched my face, I felt something inside me stand taller. I set a lamp by the window, plugged it in, and watched the room soften around its circle of light. Back at the house, I pulled the last of the photos from the hallway and wrapped them with the care you give to something that knows your history. When I locked the door that night, the click landed like a full stop, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming of a hallway and a phone. Moving day doesn't ask your permission. It arrives with dust on its shoes and a schedule in its pocket. Susan drove the second load while I followed with the plants and the file box buckled in beside me. On the third trip, Daniel stood on the front step, hands in his pockets, his face pale with a tired kind of pride. Lydia wasn't with him. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't mention Maple Grove or management papers. He asked if he could carry the heavier box. In the kitchen. He set it down and stayed there, fingers pressed to the cardboard as if it were a pulse. "I listened to Lydia," he said, his voice quiet. "I let her make your life into a plan because it made mine simpler. That isn't the son you raised." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Apologies don't rewind time. They mend what can be mended and point you toward the rest. I told him he was responsible for his part and that love doesn't excuse harm. It asks you to stop doing it. He nodded, a small, aching yes. When he left, he hugged me with the carefulness of a man carrying something both fragile and heavy. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders squared, no folder in his hand. The road in front of him was his to take, and for once, I wasn't standing in the way or expected to pave it. On Sunday, Ethan pressed his drawing against my new balcony door and grinned at his reflection. He'd drawn the apartment with a sun the size of a dinner plate and a stick figure on the balcony labeled Grandma in careful, leaning letters. We sat at the little table and ate grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally, the way he likes. He asked if the balcony was safe for paper airplanes, and I said we'd test that as scientists, not as vandals. He laughed so hard milk nearly came out of his nose, and I thought, this laughter is the kind of security no paper deed could ever guarantee. When he and Daniel left, the apartment kept their warmth for a while. I washed the 2 plates and 1 pan and felt the clean edge of a new routine press into place. I unpacked a box of photos and arranged them on the bookshelf, Jim holding baby Daniel, Susan and me in younger years, Ethan missing 2 front teeth. They looked different here, as if the new walls gave them fresh permission to shine. The phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Carter confirming the utility transfers and the final receipt. Another from Susan asking if I wanted to try the park path after lunch. I stepped onto the balcony, the winter sun cold but steady on my face, and listened to the quiet the way you listen to a song you chose on purpose. I didn't win a battle against youth or against change. I set a boundary and stood beside it until it held. That, I realized, is the gift of age. The right to choose your own ending and to begin again with your name still on the door. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.